Hello there and welcome back to the Chap's Guide. My name is Ash and of course I am your host on this journey through men's style, self-development and personal grooming, or anything on your journey towards Chap Nirvana. And of course that journey through our lives has a destination. There's one place that we're all heading. You can probably guess what that destination is by the way I'm dressed. But the reason why I'm talking about this topic today is because I've received a question from a viewer called Richie Boy Evans, and I'll just read for you what he says. Basically, he says, the question I'd like to pose is this, is to what you feel chap mourning etiquette should entail in regards to clothing. Now, Richie Boy tells us he's from a gypsy family and that within the gypsy community they still hold a lot of gypsy traditions, including very much that of mourning the dead. Now, Richie Boy says his uncle passed away in June of 22 last year, and prior to the funeral, a black armband is worn by everybody in the family, and then at the funeral itself, a white shirt with black tie. After the funeral, as per tradition, close family members will wear totally black garments for a 12-month period. For Richie Boy himself, that includes a black pocket square, a black hat and a black cap during the day in the daytime, and a black Homburg during evenings and more formal daytime wear. Do you feel that this is now outdated as a tradition? Richie Boy poses the question. And should I be thinking of changing this in some way? Grateful for your thoughts. Well, what a great question. And you know, it actually sparked me into undertaking quite a bit of research onto the topic, because whilst, of course, the destination of death, end of life, will face all of us at some point, and I have to admit, I try to avoid going to funerals as much as possible because, you know, let's be honest, life doesn't need the tragic reminder that one's mortality is always ticking down. But it's important to know where these traditions stem from, how they originate, and the best way to do that, I found, was to look back in history and learn more about the topic. Now, when I stepped back into history to discover more, it was fascinating to discover that black, even though I'd taken it for granted as the funeral colour, actually goes back many thousands of years as the colour of choice to show respect and reflect the sombre nature of a funeral. Certainly as far back as the Roman Empire, where it would be quite common practice for participants in a funerary procession to wear black togas or black outer clothing to show respect for the recently deceased. Now, in addition to black, it was often also substituted with a dark purple colour to show, again, respect, because this was a colour which was challenging to create. If you imagine black and dark, rich colours of purple and colours of that nature, they're difficult to manufacture many hundreds if not thousands of years ago because of the dyeing processes involved in creating that colour in clothing. So it was something which was generally reserved for the rather well-to-do members of society. Those ordinary folks who couldn't afford lavish clothing like black and purples, they didn't have the advantage of dressing in that way. Now, a little bit closer, in the medieval period, we also see black as the colour being worn by people in funeral processions to distinguish themselves as mourners rather than just members of the public. And I mean, the same situation existed in so much as, you know, black is not a colour which is routinely worn by people because it is challenging to get those dark, rich colours with the dyeing processes which were around in that time. So again, the wealthy would be those who would be able to demonstrate their sadness and their mourning period much more than the ordinary person. Now, black very much solidified its position as the undisputed colour of mourning in the 19th century. And if we want to put an exact date on it, we could probably say it began in 1861, where black became accepted and recognised as the funerary colour by everybody in the Western world. And that was because that was the year that Prince Albert died. Now, Prince Albert was the consort of Queen Victoria. At this time, 1861, Queen Victoria was the most influential and powerful woman in the world. She was the Queen of the British Empire and held sway over a huge portion of the population of the world. In effect, her actions were very quickly reflected throughout all of those people who were her subjects. Now, when her husband died of typhoid at the relatively young age of, I think he was in his very early 40s, it propelled Queen Victoria into this state of mourning which she continued to observe for the remainder of her own life. She never remarried, she never entered into a loving relationship with anybody post the death of her husband, and she absolutely sort of devoted herself to demonstration of mourning. She wore black for the remainder of her life. And of course this, again, because of her influential position, reflected in how other people acknowledged and demonstrated their own sense of mourning and loss following the death of a loved one. And this would have gone on across the whole Victorian period and continues right up to the current day. Now, way back in the Victorian era, if a husband predeceased his wife, it would be commonplace for the wife to wear entirely black clothing for at least a period of 12 months. In fact, she would be unlikely to even reveal her face in public. She would wear a veil for at least 6 months. So quite an extended period, and was often, considerably longer, but 12 months would have been the minimum social expectation. Now, for a gentleman widower, so a chap who's lost his wife early, it wasn't quite so rigorous. The gentleman would be expected to wear a black suit for 3 to 6 months, and then to transition back into normal attire. I mean, let's be honest, in the Victorian era, I don't think the palette of clothing colours was too much deviated from the darker shades anyway, but for a gentleman it would have absolutely been a black suit for the first period, 3 to 6 months. Now, this habit of wearing black as the funerary colour spread from the UK, the British Empire, to North America, to other parts of Europe, and I think today it's generally accepted that black would be the colour that one wears in mourning to show respect, and perhaps we transition to a slightly more formal way of dressing to do that. Now, you would have thought things have moved on. But I actually, as I took some research on this topic, I spoke to my parents. My father's 91, my mother's 84. So, they've got a lot of experience behind them of funerals and, let's be honest, going back to the mid-20th century when they would have started, becoming aware of fashions and the way people dressed for certain events. And they're from the very poor part of South Wales, in the valleys, a mining community, so very traditional and very stayed and stuck in the tradition of the era. Now, my mother tells me that it would have been common for a widow to wear black attire for at least 3 to 6 months, totally black attire. Then typically the widow would transition into purple clothing. Now, it's the first time I found an account of this, but the widow would move from black into purple. And this is like a transitional phase, demonstrating to the world that there's been a loss. You've lost a spouse, but you're not in that initial stage of mourning. You're now in the purple phase, which is showing that it's at least 6 months prior. So you'd be surprised how in recent memory the sort of traditions that we assume have been there for a long time have started to evolve and change. So to answer Richie Boy's question, do I think that these very structured mourning periods, and particularly the way that we attire ourselves during these periods, do I think that's outdated? Do I think it's something we should move away from? Well, actually, I don't. Right? I'm quite a traditional guy, and whilst I am very much contemporary as well, I like to move forward. I'm not stuck wearing, the clothing of 100 years ago. I'm always evolving, always changing as things change. But when it comes to funerals, basically the reason why we wear dark clothing, particularly black, is to demonstrate something. It's to demonstrate our respect and our sense of loss. And black being that somber colour, which Queen Victoria chose to be the colour that she wore for the remainder of her life, following the loss of her beloved husband Albert. That's how we tend to do it in the modern era. However, that said, we evolve. So I think For many of us today, death doesn't come as suddenly as it used to maybe 100 years ago. You know, most of us have some inkling, have some warning. Sudden and unexpected deaths aren't that common anymore. So you can make plans for your future. You can tell your loved ones, you know, look, when my ultimate destiny arrives and you're planning my send-off, I don't want people to wear black and be distressed by the whole situation. I want people to celebrate my life. I want them to wear a bright item of clothing to my funeral. Now, if that's what people choose, I think we should respect it and follow their wishes. Whilst a funeral is, of course, a saying of goodbye to somebody for the final time, it is also generally the time that we have to celebrate that period of life that the person had. So I think it's important to follow their wishes. Now, if you're a gentleman and, you know, unfortunately you find yourself in a position where somebody you know has died, I think the traditional route to take would be to wear somber clothing. Now, for most of us, we don't own a black suit. A black suit is not very versatile, and I wouldn't recommend buying one. I don't own a black suit. So what I would do, I would wear the darkest coloured suit that I have in my wardrobe, and I would suggest that would need to be a charcoal grey, something like that. Now, if it's a lighter colour, the way that you can show your sense of mourning is to put a black armband on your left sleeve. That's quite easily achieved. Just get a bit of black material and, you know, affix it to an armband and wear a black tie without any patting on it, just a simple solid colour black tie and black shoes. Then you are attired for your funeral situation. If you prefer a hat, I think a bowler hat is the classic stylish gentleman's hat in black for a funeral. I don't think it could be beaten in such a situation. And today I'm wearing a black overcoat just to show that outerwear can also be symbolic of that period of mourning. But keep it simple, you know, no fancy pocket squares, no boutonnieres, nothing like that. This is not a time to show off your style chops. This is a time of somber reflection and a demonstration of respect. You're articulating to the world your sense of loss and your sense of somberness. So I think pare everything down to the bare minimum and you won't go far wrong. So to answer your question, Richie boy, I hope that helps. Basically, if traditionally in your community dressing in that fashion is the way which a sign of respect is shown to somebody who's recently deceased, I think it's absolutely fine. And in fact, I would personally play along with that. I would agree that's the way that I would choose. However, we have to stay contemporary. If the decedent, the person who's recently died, has indicated that's not the route they want to take, they want to be happy, flamboyant, joyful, because they had a great life full of happiness, and they want us to dress accordingly. Wear a colourful tie, wear a colourful, jacket or whatever. If they've made that request issued in their final instructions to us, I think it is mandated upon us to follow their instructions to the letter and do what they would have wanted us to do. So there we go. I hope you found that useful today. If you have a conundrum or a question for me in relation to gentleman's style, you know what to do. Drop the question in the comment section below or email me directly, and you'll find my email address in the About section on the YouTube channel, or it might even be on the screen just about now. So, if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, click the red button and subscribe. If you'd like to practically support the channel, you can do that by buying me a coffee, and you will find the link on how to do that in the show notes below. So until the next time, take care. Dress in the way which is appropriate for the situation that you find yourself in, be it a wedding, a birthday, or a funeral, and you will never go wrong. So take care, and I will see you again very soon.